Hi, it's Andy from PCR Global with another one of my walk and talks with regards to the ISO high level structure. So without further ado, let's just check a back blast and off we go. So we've been covering the high level structure of ISO. We've been looking at 18788, 9001, so that's security, 9001 quality, 14001 environmental, and 9001 and 45001, which is safety. So the high level structure. So far we've covered context, leadership, planning, support and operation. So we've got performance evaluation and we've got improvement next to cover. Today we're covering performance evaluation, which is one of the most important parts, I believe, of the actual high level structure, and such an important part, a requirement for sort of risk management within any sort of organisation. So we're going to talk about performance evaluation, and we're looking at the three standards, the four standards, 9, 14, 45 and 1878 for security. The high level structure, it gives us that structure, so all the clauses are probably about 98% the same as far as the high level structure goes. Once we get into the nitty gritty, into the sub clauses, they can and do vary, but it's generally, they vary for the context of the actual standard that you've got, i.e. security, safety, quality, environmental, and so on and so forth. So performance evaluation, clause 9, it's got three clauses itself. Again, slightly different, but these clauses in clause 9, the majority of them are virtually the same. So 9.1, we're looking at the monitoring, the measurement, the analysis and the evaluation. That's really important. Monitoring, measuring, analysing and evaluation. And it really is worth just taking a little thought about that, about the words individually. A lot of talk gets done about words and their sort of specific meaning. They are different. Monitoring, how do you monitor something over a cycle? Measuring, how are you measuring it? That means you're getting data, you're getting figures. So you have then something, you've done your monitoring, then you've got your measurement, and then you can move into the analysis area, whereby now you're going to go into the nitty gritty. If we think of ISO 31000 and the risk management process, analysis is in there. Risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation. So that analysis is really important. It then moves on to evaluation. For 45001, it's actually performance evaluation, but for three other standards, it is evaluation. So what are we actually evaluating our information against? Again, that's going to depend on the context of the standard and the context of your operation. Remembering that context is one of the clauses that we actually covered. So monitoring, measuring, analysis, evaluation, performance evaluation for 45001. Very, very important. If we think of plan, do, check, act, this clause 9, this performance evaluation, that's where we're stopping. It's a whole point, and we're going to have a look back over the cycle, over our management system, over our business management system, over our integrated management system. Basically, we're looking back over what we do, to see what we've done, to see if we had done it in line with the objectives that we set, if we have adhered to the compliance obligations that we have set. And again, there's a clause within this called evaluation of compliance. Again, that's really important. So when we're focusing on the four standards, when we think about quality, that's slightly different in the fact that when we do our evaluation of compliance, it's all about customer satisfaction. So there is a clause, 9.1.2, which is evaluation of compliance. We've done our monitoring, measuring, analysis and evaluation, but we'll actually evaluate it now against compliance. So if we go back at the start of the standard, when we've got our legal and other requirements, our compliance obligations, where we identified what laws, what standards we work into, then ultimately that becomes what we're going to evaluate ourselves against. So two main things stand out here. When we think about evaluating compliance and when we think about monitoring and measuring, we've got to think who, what, when, where. We've got to think how we're going to do it, how do we need to communicate the information that we're monitoring and measuring. That could be to an external organisation, it's environmental. It could be for your environmental permits. It could be, if you're in a security environment, you might need to be giving names, numbers, badges to some Ministry of Interior somewhere. So it really is important that you actually know what we're doing. You're doing, I should say. The other interesting one here is not so much on the criteria. It's within this clause we look for sort of calibration. So if you're measuring things and you're using calibration equipment, 14,001, it could be for noise, so you could be using a sound level meter. Or if you're measuring the headspace of a weapon, you could be needing to measure that. So ultimately, your equipment that you're using for that, how are you making sure that that is calibrated, that that works? So you're monitoring and you're actually measuring, you're getting the correct results and the correct data. So that's really, really important. 9.2. So 9.2, this is probably one of my favourite clauses in the entire standard, because if you fail to do your risk management prior to this, your risk assessment I should say prior to this, and you fail to do your planning, if you're doing your internal audits well, then you should ultimately identify that at the internal audit stage. My experience of internal auditing is probably 7 out of 10 companies don't do this robust enough. They do it, but they're often doing it just to satisfy the actual fact that they're going to get audited. And ultimately, as soon as I go in, the thing I want to see is the audit program. Whereby are they saying they're going to undertake their audits? And it's often easy to see just from that audit program if the risks, I wouldn't say we can identify immediately that the risks aren't being sort of monitored or controlled, but ultimately if the internal audit process isn't capturing that and checking that, then at least we can definitely say that there is a possibility that when we lift the lid on it, it isn't going to look like how we want it. This can happen quite regularly, and in my experience, if you have an inexperienced internal auditor, then their concentration is taken by actually auditing the clauses of the standard to satisfy the external auditor coming in. That has a huge risk, a huge negative risk to the organisation. One, financially, you're wasting a lot of time, you're wasting a lot of money. But then usually when we lift the lid on things like hand-arm vibration, it's not being monitored. So your external auditor comes in, he doesn't pick you up for it because they might not be that competent, or they might be, for whatever reason, they don't pick it up. They might sometimes don't even want to rock the boat. But ultimately, it's not then going to get picked up. And then you will see organisations who are ISO 45001 certified, you will see them getting fined. And you think, well, why? How wasn't that picked up by the internal auditors and even the external auditors? So 9.2 gives us the opportunity to get it right, but also a large opportunity to get it wrong. And it's not often we see a very, very robust internal audit program. My advice is always look at the risk of the organisation, look at the risk register. If you're not operating a risk register, if you're doing ad hoc, even if you're not certified to ISO, just think where the risks are. Where's the security risks? Where's the safety risks? Where's the health risks? Where's the environmental risks? HR risks? So on and so forth. And then apply these internal controls into those areas. That is going to save you a lot of pain. Certainly is. So make sure you attach your internal audit program to the risk areas. Use a risk-based approach. There's one thing I missed, thinking back to sort of the evaluation of compliance. In the standard 1878, which is for security, there is a clause in there which is one of my favourite clauses in the entire standard, which is exercise and testing. Don't trust it, test it. This means you have to apply an exercise program to the organisation, whereby you think those risks are, and you have to undertake planned exercises. So what would we want to see? We would want to see that you've identified the right areas to do exercises, you've undertaken those exercises, and you can evidence them by way of a PXR, a post-exercise report, which then is the opportunity for lessons learned. Again, a weak area, usually amongst sort of 8 out of 10 organisations, it could be better. It's just done because the auditors come in. It's not done with any vigour. There are some organisations I audit which get this absolutely superbly right, and ultimately I get treated to an actual... I can evaluate their exercise when I'm actually doing the audit or doing the consulting. whatever it may be. But they put the exercise on, and I get to see it sort of from start to finish when I'm doing my audit, which is really good. But it's important that the ISO orders, what are we going to look for? That you've identified, you've implemented it, you've monitored it, and you've got that program. You usually have an ISO internal auditor undertaking those audits, but at the operational level, then ultimately you've often got your checks and balances that you're doing. It could be a hazard checklist if you're working in an engineering company or in a garage, but ultimately if you're in private security, you could be checking ammunition, weapons, vehicles, kit and equipment. So those checks happen on the ground. That's the first line of defence. Then ultimately you've got your supervisors, the second line of defence, who are making sure that's happening. And then you should have your internal audit, the third line of defence, that is ensure the checks are checking the checkers and all the checks are getting done. And then ultimately you have an ISO auditor if you're certified. If you're certified, who is then going to check that you've undertaken those checks. That's the third line of defence, very important. So exercise and testing, even if you haven't got ISO 18778, it's worth doing it in all of the other standards. Do it throughout your business, really, really important. We're now going to move on to 9.3, which is management review, a very important clause. In the standard, you will see it has management review inputs, then the management review, then the management review outputs. What type of things are we looking for? So ultimately, it's everything you've done. It's everything you've done over that cycle. A lot of times organisations, they focus on what's written in the standard and they just follow the standard for the inputs. But ultimately, what are you doing? You're reviewing your business over the last reviewing cycle. If you set management reviews quarterly, biannually, annually, it's fully up to you. But ultimately, as long as you hit all of the requirements within the standard in an annual cycle, then we would be satisfied. Again, an opportunity to get it wrong. A lot of organisations wait right up until, they do it once a year. They wait just before the external auditors coming in, and then they do their management review. They're not going to be getting the best out of that management review. Some of the best companies I certainly see, they will set their management review, let's just say July the 1st, but prior to that, they've got all the other departments getting all their information ready and together for that management review. When they come into the management review, they present that information to the people who need to hear it, and then there is a sort of a lull in the battle, if you want. That information gets discussed. It's not time to deeply analyse it, often because organisations are quite large. But then after that, there's a bit of a soak period, and then everybody gets back together. So I see that as being fundamentally the most robust method that I've actually seen. So the management review, which is clause 9.3, very, very important. We looked at 9.1, which was monitoring, measuring, analysis and evaluation, performance evaluation. We looked at 9.2, which was the internal audit, which I think is one of the most important functions to undertake, activities to undertake. And then we looked at we looked at clause number 9.3. So that is it. Performance evaluation from the high level structure, clause 9, context, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and the next walk and talk will be on improvement. So now we're just going to spend a moment looking at the performance evaluation clause in the standards that we've actually discussed. So we've got 9001, 18788 for security, we've got 14001, and we've also got 45001. So 9001, where would this be found? So we just work our way through down into the contents page, and here we come, operations, and then we have performance evaluation. So the three clauses: 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation; internal audit and management review; and the same again, monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation, internal audit, management review in 18778. And it's going to be the same in the both standards, apart from, as we mentioned earlier, in 45001 for health and safety, you have performance evaluation. But the other main difference, the standout difference that I want to talk about in a little bit more depth, which is why I'm doing this added on version as well, is exercise and testing. So in 18788, we've got the clause 9.13, exercises and testing. Don't trust it, test it. It's really good to see this in here, and I really do enjoy auditing this part, as I said earlier on. But let's sort of have a quick look at that. The organisation shall, you've got to do it, use exercise and other means to test the appropriateness and efficacy of its security operation management systems, plans, its processes, procedures. This has to include stakeholder relationships and subcontractor independencies. Exercise of operational and incident management scenarios shall address issues identified in the risk assessment, as well as stress test the risk management procedures to identify potential problems or weaknesses. I see this being a weakness across most organisations, even organisations who work in construction environment, whereby they have, if they're working in cherry pickers, if they're working in sort of moops, where is the emergency plan for helping getting people out of that predicament if they get caught short? And I don't mean caught short and going to the toilet. I mean if there's an incident, how are we going to exercise that? Often there's written plans that somebody's written and borrowed and given from a different company, but actually testing on it doesn't really happen. So I just wanted to highlight that. It really is an important part of the risk management process. It really is an important part of health and safety of HR. If we're talking about HR, we're talking about what can we exercise and test in HR? Well, we can, can't we? We can look at next of kin. So dealing with next of kin, should there be an incident in some area of the organisation, have we tested the next of kin plans? Have we looked at speaking to them? Very, very important, because once an incident happens and we're having to produce documentation potentially to enforcing authorities, we are going to wish that we have tested the system before this time. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Performance evaluation, the ISO high level structure, clause 9. Don't trust it, test it.